Hey everyone, in today's video we're going to talk about the exposure triangle. Let's go. So let's look at these three variables in more detail. Shutter speed. Shutter speed is the length of time that is allowed to hit the sensor of the camera, and it's measured in seconds. This is possibly the easiest of the three to understand. If you want to double the amount of light, you need to double the length of the exposure. For example, if you have a shutter speed of 1/60th of a second, you want to change it to 1/30th of a second, you will add a stop of light because the shutter will remain open twice as long. Aperture. Aperture is measured using the f number, sometimes called the f-stop, which describes the diameter of the aperture, the size of the circular hole in the lens that lets in the light. The bigger the hole, the more light will reach the sensor. Every time you double the area of that opening, you double the amount of light or increase the exposure by one stop, and vice versa. The confusing part when you're starting out is understanding that the smaller number, like f1.8 or f2.8, means more light than, say, f8 or f11. The bigger the number, the smaller the opening will be on the lens. When people talk about a fast lens or fast glass, glass being a lens, they mean the widest aperture of that lens is a small number, so it can let in a lot of light. For sports, this is very important as we often work in poor light conditions and we need to keep that shutter speed high and the ISO low. So a fast lens helps us achieve that. Using a small number like f1.8 or 2.8 would also help create a separation of the subject from the background, which is ideal as you want your subject to pop and avoid distractions in the background. It's also important to note that the smaller the aperture number is, the shallower the depth of field will be. In other words, the area that will be in focus. ISO or ISO depends on how you want to read it. The final variable in the exposure triangle is ISO. ISO is the sensitivity of the digital sensor that your camera has. Higher values of ISO mean that the sensor does not need to collect as much light to make a correct exposure. Low ISO values mean that the sensor will have to gather a lot more light to make the exposure. Higher numbers mean your sensor becomes more sensitive to light, which allows you to use your camera in darker situations. The cost of doing so is more grain, also commonly referred to as noise. In a perfect world, you want to have your lowest ISO possible so you don't get any noise, unless of course that's exactly what you want. For any photo, there is only one mathematically correct exposure. That being said, you can achieve this by using hundreds of combinations of shutter speed, aperture, and ISO. The combination you pick will depend on what you want the image to look like, in other words, your artistic vision for the photo. For any given exposure, if one of the three variables changes, you need to adjust one or both of the other ones in the opposite direction. For example, if you want to decrease your shutter speed by 2 stops, you need to increase your aperture or ISO by 2 stops. Or you can change both the aperture and the ISO by 1 stop each. Thank you for watching the video. I hope you liked it. If you did, hit that thumbs up. It helps a lot. And subscribe to the channel. That way you'll be notified when new videos come up. And if you want to see more, just click right there. Thank you very much. See you later.